Hello viewers, welcome to my new video on understanding accident proforma for better investigation. As we have seen, accident proforma was revised in the year 2019 and the locomotive proforma, LHP, CASNUB and ICF, also some portion of IR stock has been included in this revised accident proforma, but there are still certain areas where we request certain improvements to have similarity of the measurements with the parameters. For example, in case of locomotive wheel wear, we measure the flange thickness, we measure the flange wear, we measure the tread wear, we measure the root wear. But in case of wagons and coaches, these are just to be checked with the help of a tie defective gauge, which is not at all sufficient and does not give the exact value. So item by item and coach, locomotive and wagon wise, I have tried to bring out certain areas where we can have some improvements, and rather than giving remarks about the condition of say elastomeric pad or say condition of center pivot, when these are measurable, these should be measured. They have a specific value of rejection or retaining in service, so we should go by the dimension rather than the condition. So this is what I have tried to bring out in this PPT. I hope you would be enjoying in the coming slides. So keep watching. So unlike locomotive where we measure the actual wear, the same should be applicable in case of wagons and coaches as well, where we can exactly measure the flange, root and tread wear. Then instead of putting remarks on the condition, this should be replaced with the actual values. Like in case of pivot, condition of pivot, what is the condition of pivot? Say someone says it is worn out, the other one will say it is okay. How do we justify it, whether it is okay or it is worn out? So until and unless we have the exact measurements, because its wear is defined, maximum wear is limited. Beyond that, it has to be replaced or reconditioned. So the conditions and the remarks need to be replaced with actual dimensions and measurements. Also, as in case of ICF, we have the measurement of bogie to bolster clearances, but this is not mentioned in case of CASNUB. So we would request that this should be incorporated, because there is always a hesitation and a maximum reluctance in giving certain items which are not in the columns, though they are columns like 53 or 54 as in case of coaching stock and CASNUB, that any measurement which is relevant to the derailment should be recorded, but normally this is always opposed. Hence, once it comes in the proforma, it becomes a binding on either side. As regards wheel diameter, now it's very surprising that in case of locomotive, we do have limit prescribing maximum variation on the same axle of the wheel tread diameter. But in case of wagons, it is mentioned that there is no in-service limit. I have made a separate slide for this, discussing this particular issue. So with these 4 or 5 items, we need to have the dimensions actually recorded. Now in this slide, I have taken that relevant part of proforma of locomotive, wherein we have the wheel flange thickness recorded. We have the wheel root wear on all the wheels recorded, and similarly the tread wheels. Now parallelly, if we come on to the wheel and axles of say wagon or carriage, so Observations after measuring the profile with the tire defective gauge, good, rejectable. So now this is a very vague type of dimension, because on one side for the loco we do have the actual measurements being recorded, where in case of wagon and coaches we have a go no go type of a gauge, which is most inaccurate method of measurement, where we have rejectable limits. Even in chapter 10, page 3 of 23, it is mentioned very clearly that the flanges on both sides of a wheel set are checked with the help of a profile gauge to measure the height and thickness of flanges. Accurate measurements of flange height and flange thickness is not possible with the profile gauge. Their manual itself says, but as far as the measurements are concerned, on one side for the loco we do have actual profile measurements, while we are denied in case of wagons and ICF, and this is not at all an accurate measurement as far as accident inquiries are concerned, where investigation is done on the basis of dimensions, measurements and the tolerances. So it recommends to use a wheel profile gauge with which accurate measurement of flange height and flange thickness to the extent of 0.1 mm can be made, but this is not at all possible with the help of a tire defective gauge. This slide shows the picture of a tire defective gauge which is used for measurement. Now it is simply a go and no go type. In case of uneven wear of flanges due to trammel defect or oblique fitting of dashboard, say in case of ICF, wheel diameter difference causing more wear of lower wheel diameter side flange, it's not possible to measure with the tire defective gauge the thickness of flanges on the axle. Hence, as in case of locomotive, the exact numeric value is measured with the wheel profile gauge. Same should be applicable to wagon and carriage stock, maintaining similarity in the same proforma. So in the same proforma, we do have discriminatory columns. As far as loco is concerned, we get the actual measurement. In case of wagon and ICF coaches, we don't get the measurements. We are only given a tire defective gauge to say okay or non-okay, which is a vague item. Now, thus the items which can be measured taking it okay is ridiculous. Similarly, in wagon, condition of EM pad, side bearer, condition of pivot, condition of center pivot, all have specific rejection limit. Like EM pad is rejectable if it is below 42 mm height. Center pivot has wall wear of 4 mm and 5.5 mm maximum limit of wear. Side bearer rings have a specific rejectable height. So where we have dimensions given and their rejection values are specified, so rather than measuring the or recording the condition okay or non-okay or satisfactory, good or bad, it's better to have the exact measurements of these items rather than recording the conditions. This is what I try to explain in this, because until and unless, say for example, this wheel flange doesn't become less than 16, it cannot come into this slot. Because if this is also 16 and this is also 16, it will never come, though 16 is the last limit of rejection. So until and unless this goes 15 or so, this gauge does not work. Hence, it's recommended to actually record the measurements. Now in case of ICF coach, we measure this clearance marked in this between yellow two lines and these two arrows. This is known as clearance between bolster top and bogie frame. So this is the bogie frame and this is the bolster. This clearance we measure. This is in case of ICF. And on the next slide, I will show you same dimension or same item is not given in case of Cassner bogie. This is view of Cassner bogie, and these are the columns relatively filled in case of derailment, type of bogie, lateral clearance of side frame, and this is that clearance, lateral clearance between side frame and axle box adapter. These are those on this portion, but this item is missing. This is available in case of ICF, but the same is not being recorded in case of Kastner. So from here we can assess either it's animal loading or we have some sort of a defective suspension system. So this needs to be incorporated as it is already available in case of ICF coaches, but in Kastner it's not there. So this is required to be incorporated as a subsidiary item. Dear viewers, this is what I have found out with great difficulty, because this part 3 conference rule I had read in my initial service stage, wherein I was still remembering that there was no such condition mentioned in the IRCA of 1973. See, if we see minutely, this is an edition of 1973 and this is 2.8.14.2. The variation in tread diameters should not exceed the permissible maximum limit indicated below. For four-wheeled trolleys, 0.5 mm in BG, 13 mm on the same trolley, and on the same wagon also it was 13 mm. And four-wheeled units nowadays they are almost phased out. It was 0.5 and 0.5 mm both for BG and MG. Let's stick to BG, and 25 mm in case of a wagon, on the same wagon. Nothing here is mentioned to that there is no any service limit also. So these limits we used to measure and maintain and also record when there used to be derailment in case of wheel diameter on the same tread is concerned. This we used to follow. This was both applicable for in case of turning for new wheels as well as in service tolerance. Now after 1973, this edition has come up. This is the same IRCA Conference Rule Part 3, and this is rules for maintenance and examination of BG good stop. Here, see, on the same axle for four-wheeled units it's 0.5, on the same trolley it's 13, and on the same wagon it's 25. And here see we have at the last in the note 4 it's mentioned that there is no in-service limit for this variation. So now this is not understood how it has come. A point to ponder upon is there is a limit of wheel diameter difference on the same axle, maximum to the extent of 1.6 mm in case of locomotive and 2.5 mm in case of electrical locomotives. Whereas 42 or 43 wagons behind that locomotive or 24 coaches behind that locomotive do not have any in-service tolerance limit. It is ridiculous. It is totally ridiculous, as I will be making a separate video on wheel diameter difference and its effect in comparison to foreign railways also. But this needs to be given a cognizance that in service there is no limit, so we will follow this only as in service or out service. I mean from the turning shop to the service, this is the only limit which needs to be followed. So this is the difference which I wanted to bring, that in 1973 edition there used to be limit on the same axle for the wheel diameter difference to the extent of 0.5 mm. While in 2020, when we have CNC lathe machines and we are having computerized cut exercise on the wheel while profiling, and now we don't have any service limit, this is a bit difficult to digest and accept. So this is where we need to request our higher ups to come into action and raise such issues at appropriate forum so such problems and such issues are resolved. On this slide, the wheel limits, the wheel size variation limits are given, and the following limits apply to wheel diameters. The new wheel values are listed below to be used when turning wheels in the shop, and the worn out values are to be used when the inspecting locomotive to determine the need for wheel turning. Mean between two wheels on the same axle, new limit is 0.5, whereas the worn out is 1.6 mm. Between axles within the same bogie, it's 3.2, while worn out on the same bogie is 6.4, and the worn out is maximum 31.8 on a locomotive on both the bogies. Now, what we need to look basically these two, and we get differences more than this. I have just recently recorded and analyzed the measurement. So these are the limits given for locomotives, and it's really unacceptable that there is no limit, no in-service limit for wheel diameters on the same axle or on the same bogie or on the same trolley in case of coaching stock and goods stock. Well, viewers, it's not that there is no in-service limit. It is there, but if one sees very minutely the ICF manual, figure 10.1, the variation in the tread circumference of wheel on the same axle. So you can't read here. It is mentioned that the circumference difference on the same axle should not be more than 1.6 millimeter on the same axle. And again, you can't read the variation in wheel dia between one pair of wheels and the other. So we can't read here, the words have been jumbled. Now I'll try to show on enlarged view of this particular write-up in the next slide and see. So as I said, this is the enlarged view of that write-up, and this reads the variation in the tread circumference on the up to here, then same axle 1.6 mm. The variation in the wheel dia between one pair of wheel and the other is 5 mm. So here very minutely one has to see and can make it out 1.6 mm. So here what they have mentioned, on the same axle the circumference difference should not be more than 1.6. They have used word circumference. So circumference, if it is, shouldn't be more than 1.6 mm, so that means 0.5 mm into pi, because circumference is pi d, so it comes around 1.57, so which is near to 1.6 millimeters. And in the second note, it's mentioned that the variation in the wheel dia on the one pair of wheel and the other should not exceed 5 mm. So this is 5. God knows whether it is intentional, but limits are prescribed. There are limits, and I would request top management to get such issues resolved for the betterment of the investigation purposes and for the guidance of the PWHIVH, and it's not there is no in-service limit as regards to wheel diameter difference is concerned. These are restricted, these are prescribed, but are sometimes overruled by overpowering. So this needs a proper clarification. Let's have a summary of discussion what we discussed in these slides. Insist on clause 56 of Vaughan Proforma and 54 of Carriage Proforma, which gives the liberty to report any measurement which is relevant to the cause of derailment. In case of any denial or reluctance of giving, in fact, senior DSO of the division or the concerned unit is the officer concerned and in charge for getting the measurements done as per the Proforma. And while Para 7 of General Guidelines of the Revised Accident Proforma, Inquiry Committee can get any sort of additional measurements required in the case of any derailment. And the Proforma needs minor modification, what we have discussed in the subsequent slides as to where the parameters are measurable. We should resort to the measurements rather than describing the condition, which is somewhat a vague item. So these items are like the thickness of EM pad, pivot, wear, the side wear or ring height, bronze piece height, flange wear, root wear, and tread wear. And since the wheel diameter difference has limits for locomotive, the limits of carriage have been hidden. I have already shown in the slide, and the same is applicable to in service when it is not mentioned. So we should insist when there is no limit, so this is the limit. And the accident Proforma should also contain free height of the springs, as found in many cases, even under tear weight. The casket springs are very free and that they can be shaken with the normal fingering or normal wire piece or so. So free height of the springs is to be included in the accident Proforma, which is very, very important. Well friends, thanks for watching. And I would like to request you to give me your valuable comments so that I can improve my subject and come with more and more information on the derailment investigation. And do subscribe, like, view and share my videos. Thanks once again for watching.